The announcement is that certain weapons and munitions surrounding things like Patriot missile interceptors, Stinger, AIM air-to-air missiles. But first, I want to play what the State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce had to say in reaction to this Department of Defense announcement. So here we go.
I understand the decision on which weapons to provide to Ukraine being one taken at the Pentagon, but from a diplomacy standpoint, does pausing the weapon deliveries for Ukraine make it more difficult to get Russia to come to the table in terms of a peace agreement or a ceasefire, because it somehow relieves potential pressure on them?
It's a very good question, but it's good that it's not going to be a factor, because we haven't paused sending weapons to Ukraine. This is one aspect, one situation, one event that has been changed. As you heard from the DoD, there are multiple robust other options and efforts regarding the Ukrainian situation with weapons. Again, I don't speak for the DoD.
So how about we start with you, Larry? What's happening here? What do you make of this situation regarding now this announcement that has stunned both Ukraine and its NATO backers?
Yeah, she's putting lipstick on a pig. Look, the reality is we have exposed the war in Ukraine and our attack on the Houthis and our support of Israel in its war with Iran and our role in that. It's exposed that the United States does not have fully stocked warehouses and unlimited supplies of Patriot missiles, THAAD missiles, Arrow 2, Arrow 3s, javelins, go down the list, 155 millimeter artillery shells. We do not have the industrial capability anymore to produce those in any kind of significant quantities, particularly at a replacement level when they're used in combat. I think that's one aspect of this, but the other aspect of it, we got a hint. Emmanuel Macron calls up Vladimir Putin, and they talk about Iran and Israel, and then they talk about hey, well, about ending this war? And Putin makes one very important point to him. He says, the West has got to realize that it's got to stop supplying Ukraine. Now, was it just a coincidence that within like 6 hours of that conversation between Macron and Putin that the DoD announces it's suspending these shipments of these weapons? Yeah, I'm not a big believer in coincidence. I think they were somehow connected, but the United States, we're still in a bit of denial. We don't recognize, despite Trump's claim that we're the biggest, best, strongest military in the world, we're not.
All right. How about you, Scott? What's your reaction to this, your assessment? There's been very conflicting messages here. There's Tammy Bruce saying, well, there's other options, there's other things that can be done. But what actually happened here and what is going on?
I think what's happening here is that we have a defense procurement system that is optimized for peacetime operations and export operations, and not optimized for the reality of high intensity conflict. The Patriot is an expensive system, originally designed as to shoot down airplanes. Later on, it took on an anti-ballistic missile role, but a lot of our current production is predicated on the precedent of the Gulf War, where Iraq fired 49 Scud missiles into Israel and another 48 or so into the Gulf Arab states. And the expenditure rate of the Patriot was absorbable by on-hand stocks and replenishable by the money allocated for that purpose. Now we roll into the 20 years of the global war on terror. How many Patriots were fired in anger during this period of time? When the United States is talking about the prioritization of budgets, I don't think a high degree of priority was placed on fielding the Patriot system, et cetera. We were working on, getting the SM-3 upgraded to the SM-6 so that we could have Aegis ships providing some sort of ballistic missile defense. But the Patriot, received, some upgrades, but, we weren't producing them and stockpiling them in preparation for what turned out to be a new reality. Take a look at the expenditure rate of the Ukrainian armed forces using Patriot to defend against Russian drone attacks and ballistic missile attacks. It was unsustainable. We literally we couldn't produce them quick enough. We had to borrow them from other nations, and we had to draw down our own stockpiles. And then you throw in, the Houthi throwing a curveball at us, and then the 12-day war with Iran. You have a commander in the Pacific right now who has been told that the United States is pivoting to the Pacific and that he needs to be prepared to deal with a Chinese threat. And I would imagine that if you receive that kind of instruction from the White House, one of the first things you do is you pull out the op plans and you do an op plan review to make sure that we have the forces allocated to accomplish the mission, but more importantly, logistical sustainability. And I'm fairly certain the J4 went up and raised his hand and said, boss, we run out of ammo in, D+3 or D+7. But the bottom line is this is an unsustainable of it. We can't let the National Command Authority believe that we can carry out these plans. We have to inform the National Command Authority that we are incapable of fulfilling the mission given to us because of logistical constraints, ammunition depletion. We've given everything away. Nobody's replacing it. We can't fight this war. That's what I think happened. I believe that Pacific Command put the Pentagon on notice that they're incapable of carrying out the mission that's being tasked to them. And unless things are reversed, and I think Central Command did the same thing. Said, if you want to continue with this high stakes poker game we have going with Iran, understand this, that our forces are literally, they can't be defended. We don't have the ability to defend them over a sustained period of time. This is grossly irresponsible. And so then we have to factor in the following. The reality is that Ukraine is not a high priority mission for the United States anymore. It's not just the political change that's taken place with Trump, but the reality that Ukraine can't win this war, and that there's nothing that Europe can do and the United States can do to reverse that trend. And therefore, you're literally throwing good money after bad by continuing to supply weapons to Ukraine and in the process committing suicide. So I think this was a political decision that if you are Ukrainian or sympathetic to Ukrainian cause, you need to understand the reality that we have just dumped you. We aren't going to support you anymore. Yes, there might be some, supply streams going forward. I mean, Tammy Bruce obviously isn't going to lie, so maybe she can point to, we're providing Xerox paper or something of that nature. But the high value ammunition, the Patriots, the Stingers, the things they need to fight on a daily basis, they're not there, and that means that Ukraine's stocks will reach zero, which means they can't be defended, which means the Russians will enjoy even greater success. That's the reality that exists because we don't have a defense procurement system capable of beefing up supplies to the Pacific and the Middle East while we continue to throw munitions away at Ukraine.
Garland, your take on this? We've been hearing for so long under the Trump administration for these many months that this Ukraine conflict was going to draw down, that they were going to end it. We don't hear so much about that rhetorically anymore. It's going to end, but yet we see this move. What's your assessment?
I think there's two things that I could add, and that would be number one, of course, the obvious, and that is that the empire's overextended. I still recall it might have been 5 or 10 years ago, hearing Chris Hedges do this discussion where he talked about how empires end, and he talked about getting into all of these boneheaded military adventures, and that's how they fall apart. And now we're seeing that, and I think that is linked to what's going on here, in that the nature of warfare is changing. You know, when you design an air defense system, maybe in the 80s or 70s or whatever, you're thinking of planes, right? Which means the number of planes that a country has is going to be fairly limited. You can probably count them. Okay, Russia has whatever, however many fighter planes, 1,500, 2,000 fighter planes, just as a number. And then you can say, well, we've got enough missiles to shoot down every one of their fighter planes times 5. And okay, you're fine. Now, what we have is where people are using drones and missiles. It's incompatible with air defense systems that were designed to shoot down planes. It is not compatible to have that air defense system and to face missiles, particularly when behind your air defense system is the industrial capability to produce the missiles. Not just to produce the numbers of missiles, but to produce them at a price that is affordable, that allows you to produce the number that you need, right? So what we have now is we have drones and missiles that may cost anywhere from, in some instances, $10,000 and less, and some up to maybe $1 million, some of the Iranian drones. But the missiles to take them down are from $2 to literally $18 million. So we're seeing now warfare has changed in a way that the United States is really generations behind when it comes to air defense. Their air defense is set up to shoot down fighter planes and planes. Some of these systems that we use, they don't really look much at the low. They're not really good at shooting the low flying things because these fighter planes and observation planes way up here, we can shoot them down with a missile. Great. But they can be flooded with drones. They can't produce the numbers. They can't produce them at a price. So not only is this an indicator of a current problem that we have in it supplying the missiles to Israel or whatever proxy, Ukraine around the world, and we have far too many, but that one is too many, but that even as the future goes, we're not going to be able to be the military power that we once will, because we can't produce the numbers at the prices that would allow us to even be, and I use this word, I don't really like using this word, but to be militarily competitive in the environment. You just can't do that with $18 million missiles. You're out of the game.
Yeah, and Larry, what do you think explains why, Russia is very clear. Vladimir Putin was in a call recently with Donald Trump, and he said very clearly that Russia is going to continue to address the root causes of this conflict, and we'll see those all the way through until they are fully addressed. But the Trump administration is unable to, despite these kind of moves, to vocalize and be very clear about ending this conflict. Even rumors that this ridiculous 500% tariffs, that they're flirting with this, punishing other countries for supporting Russia over Ukraine. What's your assessment of this? Why is it that this conflict seemingly continues even when steps like this occur, these drawbacks?
We're in denial of what we are. With the end of World War II, we found ourselves thrust into the role of being one of the world's leaders, and in fact, there was a competition at that point between the United States and the Soviet Union. But when we declared victory in 1991, we've been unwilling to relinquish that role. Our entire military is built up as an expeditionary force. It's not governed by any clear strategic doctrine of national defense, which goes to the point that Garland was making about the weapon systems that are designed, developed, produced are not connected to a national defense strategy, whereas Russia is. Russia is not an imperial military power. They're not going around the world trying to see where they can project force. They're not insisting on setting up, over 700 bases around the world. They do have interests close to home. They do pay attention to what's going on their borders. But their entire military has been structured specifically for defending the homeland, not for attacking the United States or conquering Europe. And, we refuse to come to grips with that. And when Putin's talking root causes, what he's talking about is, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States, along with its NATO allies in Europe, have embarked on a campaign to destroy Russia. The Ukraine has been a de facto member of NATO since 1995. The only thing they didn't have to kick in, 5% of their budget to NATO, and they didn't have Article 5 protection. But other than that, in terms of participation in NATO military exercises, hosting NATO military exercises, providing a base in Ukraine at Yavoriv for NATO, it's been a NATO entity in all regards. So from that standpoint, Ukraine was used as a proxy for attacking Russia, and that's one of the things Russia's going to put an end to. That's going to stop. That's not going to be allowed to continue.
The Bild German media recently put out right after this announcement was made on the weapons drawdowns, the pause on weapon shipments to Ukraine, that Ukraine will only have a couple of months left to survive in this conflict. Give your, we've heard this before though, that the different pauses and various problems, there's this panic ensuing. But what's your overall assessment on where the situation is now that these weapons have been paused?
Well, one thing I've learned in opining about predictions regarding Russia and Ukraine is that you can't use traditional norms and values and templates. I come from a Marine Corps background, very aggressive background. I just want to remind people that during the Gulf War, when the Marines briefed Schwarzkopf on the final ground campaign, we said, we'll be in Kuwait City in 3 days. And Schwarzkopf said, no, your job is to fix the Ukrainians in place. There's no way you're punching through the heaviest defenses there. So he gave it short shrift. Meanwhile, while 7th Corps was floundering in the desert and creating gaps between it and the Syrians and the Egyptians, causing an operational pause, we punched through the Iranian lines. We took Kuwait City in 3 days. Why? Because we're very aggressive. Because we don't know how to hit the pause button. And so my brain works that way as somebody who helped plan that attack. My brain is a very aggressive brain. So I have traditionally applied Marine Corps aggression to the Russian military situation. And the Russians just aren't playing my game, which is okay. It's their war. I think that the Russians are operating on a war of attrition schedule, which means that they don't give a damn about the calendar. They care about outcomes. One of their outcomes is the physical destruction of the Ukrainian military over time. When they speak of demilitarization, it can be done either through negotiations where the Ukrainians voluntarily demobilize down to 50,000 men, or it can be done on the battlefield where Russia will kill every Ukrainian until they get down to 50,000 men, and then they'll surrender, and that'll be it. But to put a timetable on this is impossible because, just again, to give you an example, and this is something that the American military reflect on. I think Larry will hopefully agree. The standard, when I went through the basic school back in 1984, 85, the finishing school for Marine lieutenants, we have a 3-day war at the end of it. And one of the missions that we have during the 3-day war is assault against a fortified position. So you're going up against a series of bunkers that are have interlocking fields of fire, et cetera. So you have to plan how you're going to take out the bunkers one at a time while shielding yourself from the others, et cetera. If you screw it up, you die. I mean, it's training, so you just theoretical death. But it's one of the toughest missions that we were given, an assault against a fortified position. And we would go in with a Marine rifle company and carry out this attack. And that's, my brain thinks in that way. It's rifle company, appropriate fire support, et cetera. The Russians don't do. I've had fascinating conversations with Russian generals, Abdi Aladanov and others. The Russians have rethought the whole approach. They do assaults now against a fortified position remember, we're bringing a Marine Corps company against a fortified position held by a platoon because you want the 3-to-1 advantage. The Russians are assaulting because the Ukrainians now, they no longer have battalion-sized defensive positions or company size or even platoon. They basically talking about a reinforced squad. You're talking about 11 to 15 Ukrainian soldiers dug into a position. The Russians are assaulting this with 3 to 6 Russian soldiers. They call it 3s and 6s. That's their new term. The lead assault unit is 3 Russian soldiers who operate together, but they go in with fire support. They come in with drones, heavy drone support. And these 3 guys either die in the assault, which happens, or they succeed in the assault. And once they seize this fortified position and eliminate the Ukrainian squad, either killing them or capturing them, very rarely because of the drone supremacy does the Ukrainians escape. Once the Russians lock in on your position, either Ukrainians kill the Russian soldiers or they all die. But if Russia fails in the assault, they lost 3 guys, which isn't the end of the world. It's tragic for those 3. But the point is, this is a whole new way of thinking. It just boggles the mind that you would attack a fortified position occupied by 11 to 15 Ukrainian soldiers with 3 guys. But the Russians are doing this and they're winning over and over and over again. And once they occupy the position, they bring in the 6s who then secure the position, and then they prepare. Generally, they'll secure it for a couple of days. They'll do a rotation, and then they take the next tree line, the next fortified position, chunk after chunk after chunk after chunk after chunk. Very successful, and they're killing a lot of Ukrainians doing this and not losing a lot of Russians. Forget what you read in the media. The Russians are not, drowning in the blood of their own soldiers. It's a very deliberate process that they have in place here, which is resulting in the reduction of the Ukrainian army, but you're not getting the impressive gains, the big arrow gains. But the Russians are making significant gains. Just the other day, 10.5 square kilometers taken in chunks, because what will happen is you'll take a tree line, and if you didn't get the resistance, then they'll move on and take the next line, and and they'll go as long as they can sustain the 3s and 6s. When they get to a point where the resistance is too much, they don't sacrifice their soldiers in human wave assaults. They pull them back and they pound the crap out of that position. They bring up the drones, they suppress the Ukrainian drones, and they move in and they do it again. This is going to go on forever. As long as the Ukrainians are able to put a squad on the ground, the Russians will continue to do this for as long as it takes. We can't, I refuse anymore to fall into the trap of trying to put a timeline on this. The Russians are winning this war. There's no way they will stop winning this war. One of the major objectives is demilitarization, which requires the physical destruction of the Ukrainian military. There are between 700 and 900,000 Ukrainian soldiers mobilized to this day. The Ukrainians are able to generate, 14,000 more a month. Not the highest quality soldiers, but they're getting them by bumping them on the head. But it's not just that. That's sort of propaganda to focus on that. They are recruiting soldiers who go to training. Just like everybody else, they are conscripting people. It's not all about thumping on the head. People are volunteering. Some of these people are patriotic. The quality of the Ukrainian soldier is not uniformly poor. It's actually the opposite. Very, quality fighters, well equipped. Some of them are well trained, a lot of combat experience. They're tough. The Russians are beating them, but the Russians themselves have said, we'll go on as long as it takes. We'll go on forever. 21 years. They bragged about the negotiator in Istanbul. 21 years it took to defeat the Swedes. You don't think we can do this for 21 years? We're ready to go 2, 3, 5, 7. We are going to do this as long as it takes. And that's the reality. This is inevitable. This becomes an inevitability. And, I think Ukraine's defeat will be hastened by the reduction of military support. But understand that Europe is continuing to pour in weaponry and supplies. And, every time they deliver it, that just extends the war longer. But the Russians are dominating every aspect of this conflict. And there's nothing that can be done to change that. So this war of attrition will continue for as long as it takes.